We're running a few minutes late. I'm gonna call the meeting to order at 6:36. Nice to see everyone on this beautiful day. On our consent agenda, we have just the prior minutes from our August 3rd meeting. Any discussion, questions about prior minutes and the consent agenda? All right, so then I'll just make a motion to accept the consent agenda. We'll do that by roll. John?
Yes.
Nope, not here.
All right, Arlene,
Yes.
Lisa,
Yes.
Kat,
Yes.
Miranda, Emily,
Yes.
and Mary is an aye. Lynn, any need to reprioritize the flow of the meeting tonight?
No.
No? Okay, sweet. And no visitors in the online realm?
No visitors online.
No visitors in person. All right, so that brings us to our school spotlight. And Lenny, you're up first.
Actually, ours is on one PowerPoint, and
Okay,
mine is first, so.
And I shared it with Morgan.
all right.
Okay, just give me a sec.
Ready?
Yeah.
So Lenny and I are going to talk a little bit about restorative approaches and beyond, and it's a continuation of our journey in creating a community of belonging for all. But we're going to focus a little bit on kind of the things that we did through last school year and our goals for the coming year. Yes, I believe.
Yeah.
Well, minus.
Yes.
Okay. The first thing in the slide is really just talking about the group that we've been working with. So we've been working with Partners in Restorative Change, and they've changed their name to Starling Collaborative. And part of the reason for their change is they've been looking at schools, not just our two schools, but other schools in the state, and realizing there's a lot of pivoting and flowing and moving and coming together around the challenges that are facing all of our schools at this time. And their work isn't just about restorative approaches, but really about the work of trauma, informal practices, mindfulness, SEL, equity, and wellness for youth and adults, which fits right into some of the things we're doing in the SU, as well as each of our schools. So some things that we know, next slide, Morgan, is that schools need systems in place in order to sustain restorative approaches. Ongoing training is essential for sustainability. Many schools are doing this work, and we can learn from each other. Student leadership is an important part of all of this work, and we need to hear our students' voices, and that this work, as I had said, ties to so many other things that we're doing. So for Bakersfield in particular, where did the words go? Oh, there we go. One of the first things we did, and I would say this was about December of last year that we started this, was a history mapping of what's gone on in Bakersfield over the last 5 or 6 years. And no surprise to some of you, I'm sure, is that there's been a lot of turnover in our school in the last 5 or 6 years. And another thing that we noticed was not only has there been turnover of staff from everywhere from the principal down through paraeducators, but that there's also been change in school initiatives and systems over those years. And part of that is just simply because there's new people. There's also been some really big outside events that have affected our schools. We all know that COVID affected our schools, but also things like the political landscape, things around equity issues and racism in our country, school shootings, and other safety kinds of things like that, and some of these other big events, and technology. And technology has changed a lot in the last 5 or 6 years, and it's impacted our kids and our schools. And then we looked at some good things. The staff that works at BEMS, even though there's been a lot of turnover, is really committed, they're flexible, and they want to make things better. And BEMS and the community of Bakersfield itself values its traditions and events and likes to be really connected to the school. So out of that history mapping that we did, some hopes came out of that. And our hopes were really around consistent staffing, more positive parent and family engagement, and consistent and effective systems. So after we finished our history mapping, we did some work around PBIS, which is positive behavior interventions and support, and restorative practices, which we use both of those systems in our school and have for a while, but there's been some tension between those two things and some just feelings about which one was better or not. And my approach has always been, how do we blend the two things together? And so we send all staff, paras, and teachers through a series of 6 activities, and they were aimed at understanding both systems and the linkages between them. We saw some commonalities between them both and understood that the premise of both of those systems is really to create a positive community. So PBIS is our system and our structure. That's what we decided after going through these six activities. And restorative approaches is really our how and our way of doing that. And you can be a PBIS school without restorative approaches, but in our community, we really felt that we needed to focus in on being restorative as well as working through the positive behavior supports. So then we were, I would say, late March of last year, and we went through an assets and needs assessment of our school. And out of that assets and needs assessment, we discovered some really positive things. Again, committed staff rose to the top of that as asset. High staff buy-in in the work that we were doing around restorative practices in PBIS. That there are many rituals and routines that have already been established in Bakersfield, and that we've been using restorative approaches and have an understanding of it. And that there's also an established culture of care. While it needs some work, there is this culture that we really care about each other and we're a family. And also that we have a sense of autonomy and support and engagement. Some of the needs, sorry, I'm moving my screen, not yours. Some of the needs that came out of there was that we need better communication and clarity around expectations. We need consistency of response to behavior situations. We need clearer student expectations and clear expectations around the PBIS and the RP systems so that we know exactly how we're going to blend those two things. And just a common understanding of what consistency means. So we kept kind of throwing around this word of consistency, and we came to this place where we were like, well, what do we mean by that? And so we had a lot of discussions around what does consistency really mean and look like. So going forward in Bakersfield, we have 6 kind of goals. Some of these things we've already started. So I sent 5 people to the BEST Institute, which is an MTSS institute that focuses around PBIS and restorative practices. That's a statewide institute. It's at the end of June, so I had 5 people who went there, and they created and revamped our restorative PBIS system and really focused in on the first 6 weeks of school and those lessons around expectations for students, and kind of revamping those and making sure that we had common language across all of our spaces in the school. And also they changed our school-wide big expectations. So it used to be safe, be respectful, be ready to learn, and they changed it to instead of being be to we are, in an effort to really be like, this is who we are and what we do. And they changed respectful to kind. So it's we are safe, we are kind, and we are ready to learn for this year and going forward. The next thing that we focused on was really onboarding new teachers. And just before in-service for the SU, I had a new teacher orientation day and really worked with our new teachers around what our systems are and kind of onboarding them into the work we've already started. And then we joined with Berkshire on one of those days and had an RP training with the Starling Collaborative. And then at in-service with the teachers, we really dug in and did some work around our behavior matrix and expectations and around that rollout of the restorative PBIS system and how those expectation lessons were going to happen as we started the new year. And I think it went pretty well. I mean, we have started and we did those lessons the first couple of days. We did kind of a rodeo style so that all students and staff came to point people at different places in our building and heard the same message to really work on that consistency piece. We've also committed this year to adult SEL and school climate and culture, and that work is aligned with what FNESU has committed to this year as well. And so we have some resources from the SU, and Starling Collaborative is also working with us on that piece, with a real belief that as we make sure that the adults are feeling safe and good in the building, one, will keep staff, and two, it will trickle down to the students. And we are continuing our work with Starling Collaborative, and there are action items that came out of that ANA report that are based in these goals, and we're working on those pieces as well as building up the student voice piece this year. And then our last goal is really working around what does it mean to really live out our mission of being a place where all students learn and grow through connection and care. And we've started some of that work in service, and we'll continue to dig into it throughout the year. So that's where we're at. Go ahead.
Okay, so, and then click again, perfect. So what did we learn, but it's more about what did we work on, but there was some reflection learning within that for last year is, first of all, we did continue to work on having the infrastructure for instituting restorative practices in our schools, beginning with and making sure we have a restorative practice team. Over the last 2 years, about 50% of that team has moved on to other places. So last year was making sure we got a collection of people who could work together and plan together and help implement things. And during the leadership team, the plan, the vision last year was to do some professional development with the leadership team such that those members of the team could then become leaders of learning at the faculty level. As you'll see in a couple other slides, we kind of realized that there is so much to learn, and we realized that all of those leadership team members felt like, I still have a lot to learn. I'm not ready to be like leading in understanding or leading a check-ins professional development or leading a balance in the process. I still need a lot more learning. So we did revise, you'll see in the next couple slides, we did kind of change a couple things based on that. We realized we're not going fast enough as far as developing capacity in all our school by focusing on the leadership team. One of the other things we worked on last year is the middle school team piloted implementation of issue circles or targeted SEL circles. So it wasn't really true restorative circles because they're not ready to do that. The kids aren't ready for that, but it was kind of dipping our toe in the water into that. And it was kind of, there was an issue going on in a specific grade. We collaborated with the Starling Collaborative on building some lessons and training the teachers on how to deliver those lessons. And then as the middle school teachers got more confident with that, they started being like, hey, we kind of need to do this or a different topic in the same way in the other grades. So we continue to give professional support to the middle school team to implement that from March to June. And they also, in order to do those, even those issue circles well, they did need probably more than what we were able to do, but we noticed they also needed some of that balance in the process learning and learning how to do check-ins. And this came up from one of the things we've kind of been doing, or I like to do, is see if somebody says like, hey, I'm struggling with something, I would like support with that, rather than top down, this is how we're going to do things. eventually we're going to get to that point of like, we are going to be doing restorative practices. But particularly last year and also for this year, just saying, let's do restorative practices would set everyone up for failure. But I was open to last year and I'm open to again this year, if we can see and find opportunities for a certain part of restorative practices to pilot it, and that opportunity for those people to become eventually future leaders of it when they've learned something and gained success. So the middle school team already has more familiarity than many other places in the school around doing these issue circles. So some other things that we worked on last year, as Rhoda mentioned, we did the new hire, new teacher, new paraeducator induction training with Bakersfield. We also did a paraeducator training at the beginning of the year. We had the consultation with the middle school team. We also, because of how things were going with the middle school team, and because one of the team members for the restorative practice team was in the 3rd, 4th grade, as she started hearing and learning about this, she then said, I want to pilot this on the 3-4 team, so they got to pilot it, but not too far. So later on in the year, they started doing that. And then one of the big things we noticed was identifying the plans for next year's PD. And noticing that what we really need to do is really invest heavily in doing professional development for the collective capacity of the school. And one of the also things which I didn't note in here, but we have had that conversation, is we also recognize theory can only go so far. We need to get some learning by doing. So with that said, if you want to jump to the next slide. And I might be jumping ahead, but basically one of the things we're going to be doing for next year is doing a lesson study model with the consultation with the consultant. So there's going to be professional development on a faculty meeting on a Tuesday, and then 2 weeks later, a group of teachers are going to have a dedicated 2 hours to plan out how to implement that, and then also do some observing and reflecting and revising, because we feel like just talking theory and then actually how to actually do it, we need to kind of weave both of those pieces in. So that's one of the big shifts we did for this year. But I'm jumping ahead. So here's what we ended up doing this summer. We met a few different times over the summer with my SEL interventionists and the consultants, and we worked on a few different things, making sure we met together. We were looking at a couple schools that have had some success in implementing restorative practices, such as Virgins and also Chamberlain Elementary. We started developing an idea for how to leverage our whole school community groups. I know in the future where we're going to really be jumping into SEL for our students, and this year the priority is SEL with our adults. But we heard as we were talking with restorative practice consultants, they mentioned that Chamberlain Elementary did this kind of wolf pack thing where they would go to den time, and den time had some thematic social emotional learning that was also woven into the whole school community. And we're not there yet, but we're working on planning that in consultation with the restorative practice consultants and with my social emotional learning coach to think about how could we create something like that here to start getting some practice in SEL lessons. And one of the great things about that opportunity when we start putting in place is teachers will get some further support on how to deliver social emotional learning lessons in a different context than their traditional grade level. And that's also a great way to build climbing culture, as everyone can have a thematic focus on what does it mean to be a friend, or what does safety look like, or whatever kind of social emotional target we decide to choose. We haven't gotten too deep into that, and I'll own that most of that's because I was doing all this work while also holding a baby. So we only got a couple days of work when I wanted to do months of work, and it's going to take a lot to do, but we're going to do a little bit of building on the fly for this year. And part of that I'll also point out is our social emotional learning coach / consultant was our school-based behavior consultant. So I'm throwing a bunch of words out here, which is a very essential role. We were very lucky that we NCSS was able to hire a replacement, but that person will not be fully on board until like early October. So our social emotional learning interventions is kind of doing a blend of multiple roles right now as we switch her off to this actual focus role. So maybe later in October, we'll really get to dig into some of that stuff. Next slide. Oh, sorry, I was looking at mine. I just noted it. I was like, why didn't you move it, Morgan? Come on. So we did the plan for faculty PD, which I guess, as I said, is going to be professional development at faculty meetings once a month, and then a lesson study model 2 weeks later. So we kind of give them some time to gain some information, look at some text, play with that text, and then be prepared to actually work on some actual implementation of it with some observation and feedback from other teachers as well as a consultant on the following Thursday. We also did, like I mentioned, we carried forward the induction plan to get all our new staff in and receive that indoctrination, for lack of better words, around restorative practices for new faculty members. And we also had a dedicated in-service time for the paras. But we also, one of the things we recognize with the paraeducators is a little one and done shot is not, just like for teachers, it wouldn't be enough anyway. So one of the things I'm working on is leveraging our in-service days throughout the year and leveraging those as some opportunities to work with paraeducators. Some of the days it sounds like I'm going to have more time. Some of the days I might have less time, but having that carry through for the rest of the year, the paraeducators were honest about like feeling like it doesn't seem like it's really a priority with us, and want to make sure that you guys are valued, and we know you guys are in the trenches in some really difficult parts of the day, that we want to make sure we give you that strength and capacity, and also make sure you're on board with everything we're doing. So they were really excited to hear that there's going to have multiple follow-ups to this. And next slide. So these were just some of the many topics that could be covered, one, across the whole year with the paraeducators, but also some of these topics were covered during the 3 hours that the consultant had in August. I'm not going to kind of run through all of them, but if you want to look at them later. I did share it with Morgan. I'll make sure to get it to Courtney to get it to you so that you guys can have a chance to look at this later. She has it? Okay, good. Next slide. That was, yep. So this is, I just kind of did a summary about what we're planning on doing with our teachers. So as like in summary, you know, the goal for this year is to develop a deep base of understanding restorative practices and also get a little bit of practice intentionally. So like I said, that thematic way of doing a faculty meeting, and then 2 weeks later getting an actual lesson study practice around that. And then, as I've said before, we also are going to look for opportunities to pilot certain things for certain teachers if there's a need, and we'll collaborate with the restorative practice with the Summit Collaborative to deliver on that as well. And mischief managed.
Thanks so much.
Did we keep it under 15 this time?
Not quite, but it was very close.
Well, Rhoda, you know, remember that was split time, so.
It says 20.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
It's all good, all
Yeah.
good. No, it was great. Thank you so much. It's really great work. I'm so pleased to see it happening. All right. If there are no further questions for Lenny and Rhoda, then we'll move on to the financial and business report.
So the monthly financial report went out in your packets. I am hoping that we're gonna be able to automate those, so I think by next month they're just gonna come separately, but they'll come directly to your FMESU email on probably around the 5th of the month. The only other update is that the auditors are here in a couple of weeks to start their audit of the FY22 books. For those of you who were at the SU meeting, we talked about the upcoming VISBIT annual meeting, which is Friday, October 21st, in conjunction with the Superintendent and the School Boards Association annual meetings. At the VISBIT meeting, 2 board seats will be elected. There's really no other business that's happening, and those 2 board seats are each have 1 candidate running uncontested for a seat that they already hold. You have the option of either giving VISBIT your proxy or giving an actual human your proxy. The SU board gave that proxy to Mary, who is planning on being down there. I believe Polly Rico, who's the chair of the ERU board, is going to be there, who Lynn is as well. And so I would need a motion either to name one of those people as your authorized representative, or to name the VISBIT board as your authorized representative to vote for you that day.
I'll make the motion to name Mary Niles as our authorized representative.
And so that would be a motion to appoint Mary Niles as authorized representative to appear and vote on behalf of the board at any and all meetings of the members of the Vermont School Boards Insurance Trust or any adjournment thereof.
All right, great. We'll do that by roll. John?
Aye.
Aaron is now on.
Erin,
Aye.
Lisa,
Aye.
Arlene,
Aye.
Kat,
Aye.
Miranda, and Emily. Mary is aye.
In terms of your plowing contracts for the 22-23 school year, you've got two schools that contract that service out, Bakersfield and Sheldon. Sheldon is in year 3 of a 3-year contract, so there's no need to do anything there. We bid out the Bakersfield contract last year and offered a 1-year contract to that bidder. So you now have the option of either directing me to bid that out again, or you could direct me to reach out to that contractor and see if they're willing to renew that for another year at those same terms. And I did not pregame this with Rhoda, but I would give her an opportunity to say how she feels the service is going there.
I think we should bid it out.
Morgan, has the town ever been asked if they're interested in recent years?
The town of Sheldon.
I'm sorry,
At Bakersfield. I do not remember if we specifically asked them last year, but I can certainly make sure that they get the bid documents if that's the direction to go.
It's a nice new parking lot now.
Should be a lot
Happy to
easier.
do it.
Should be a lot easier to plow.
Just to clarify, Morgan, Montgomery's, the town plows the entrance road and around the circle.
Yep.
But the parking lot, we have Avery.
Okay. I don't know that we actually have a contract with them, maybe a
We
per
don't.
time bid, so then let's put Montgomery on the docket as well. So Rhoda suggested bidding that out. Is the board okay with bidding out Bakersfield?
Yes, that would be fine.
Okay, and then for Montgomery, we could either bid that out or we could try to get something on paper. I'm happy to let you weigh in on what you think and take the board's guidance.
Avery's been extremely responsive. I can pick up the phone and say,
Yeah,
it's a little slippery, and he's there in 10
Yeah.
minutes.
yeah.
He's been wonderful. So I'd be fine continuing on with Avery. I think he's treated us well.
Yeah, I agree. For Montgomery. So we may need to formalize it a little more if it's being
I'm sure he
more
will.
of a handshake kind of situation, but it seems that we could stay the course with Avery because he's local, he does a great job, he's always available.
You know, his kids in school now too.
All right.
I guess
Yeah, nice.
I'll give Lenny an opportunity to correct me, but I'm pretty sure the town is doing everything up here still for plowing.
It's hard for me to answer that question directly right now because I know that we've done work with our custodians on having someone else plow set up. So it's possible that they do at least the main parts, and then our custodian does the rest with the
But
backup.
it's internal.
Yeah. And we got a big enough setup too that if we can do the whole area. Not that I'm volunteering to do the whole area, but sometimes when the snow comes as it may, he's been able to get that done too. So we haven't really had too many issues with it.
So I will bid out Bakersfield and we will try to fly Montgomery.
Great.
And that is all I have unless there are any questions.
That looks good. All right. So that brings us to Lynn, the superintendent's report.
Okay, hello everyone. So, sorry I couldn't be there tonight. I actually have a presentation. Morgan, can I share my screen?
You should be able to, yes.
So I'm hoping you can see the slideshow.
Yeah. Looks good.
Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna run through, there's quite a bit of data in my board report, and I won't go piece by piece through the data, but I'm certainly willing to go through it as quickly or slowly as you need me to, and feel free to ask questions as we go. So, oops, sorry. So I'm going to start off with personnel. Most everything under the personnel section this month is informational. So Mary, unless you want me to, I'm just going to, because I'm projecting it, do you want me to name everyone or just go to the action?
I don't think you need to name everyone. I think we could just jump to the one action item.
So you've got your updates on hirings, mostly support staffs on this SU contract. You've got some resignations, and there's just some remaining open positions that we're still trying to fill. So I will say the open positions, if you don't mind, just so that if there's anybody watching this, that they're aware. Bakersfield, we're still looking for a grade 2 teacher, a math and literacy interventionist, and a paraeducator. Berkshire is looking for a paraeducator. Montgomery is looking for a long-term math intervention sub. Sheldon is still advertising for a grade 5 teacher, a paraeducator, and now a custodian. We have a leave request modification that I'm going to ask the board to consider. At your last meeting, you approved a 1-year leave of absence for Kelly Hyde. And Kelly has reached out and her circumstance has changed. She's hoping to be able to return sooner than what she had anticipated. So she would like to modify that request so that she can have a leave of absence and return to work on October 3rd. So Kelly again is math teacher at Berkshire Elementary.
What are we doing in the interim, Lynn? I've forgotten.
We had posted. Yeah, I can answer. We had posted an opening, but I've been using my schedule to structure and provide supports as necessary. So it's not, we're getting by, but it'll be really awesome to have her back. We've talked about with my teachers about what might be the best transition plan, because she was originally slated to be our 3-5 team math teacher, and we pulled our interventionist to be the 3-5 teacher. So we're having some ongoing conversations about, do we slide her just straight into the interventionist role and keep that classroom teacher where they are with the rapport that they have built by the time that Kelly returns. So we're working on thinking about what's going to be best for kids and how to leverage this opportunity when she returns.
And the side is aware that she might not be coming back to her intended position?
Yeah, I already communicated that, where she was very clear. She was like, I'm just excited to be back. I genuinely mean it. You could ask me to do science if you needed to, but no, I was like, we're going to put you where you're skilled, but I appreciate the team player mindset.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, I just moved my screen around so I could see all of you, and I don't know what you can see now.
You should go back to slideshow,
Okay.
unless you want me to drive.
No, that's okay. So that actually, you know what, Morgan, that probably would be the easiest thing to do. That way I can, it's hard to manage the slideshow and not be able to see people. If you don't mind, I'm just going to share that with you quickly, and I'll do some talking while you're getting that up on the screen. So
Lynn,
oh,
you
actually,
need
I already shared that.
Lynn, you need a motion to
Oh yes, sorry.
on the leave of absence, correct?
Yes.
All right, so I'll make that motion for Kelly Hyde to return to work from her 1-year leave of absence beginning on October 3rd of 2022. By roll, John,
Aye.
Aaron,
Aye.
Arlene,
Aye.
Lisa,
Hi.
Kat,
Aye.
Miranda, Emily,
Aye.
and Mary is an aye.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Do we need
So I'm going to transition now into some conversations about teacher retention. And you shared some data with you, and I didn't get it out until earlier today, so I realized that many of you won't have had the opportunity to review that in advance. So I just want to give you some context. So what we have done for teacher retention is we've been studying this for around 5 years now to just kind of measure trends and see if we can find actionable reasons why people are leaving FMESU. So we put together some summary data from departing staff. So there are 2 things that we do. One is we send out an anonymous exit survey. So it's a Google form, and people share their information. It's voluntary. We encourage them to participate in it. Not everyone does. I think we had around 30 people who participated this year. And we also offer up a human resources exit interview. So Jamie sits down and meets either virtually, in person, or does a phone call with people who are exiting. And those questions are a little bit different. So I'm going to go through those results. So you can just kind of see that we're asking where people are from and what is the position that they have left. And looking at some of the reasons why you left FNESU, we took a look at all of the responses, and these were the numbers. So the 3 biggest would be compensation, leadership, and geographic location, followed by the direction of the SU and workload and expectations. So there were differences that we wanted to measure in terms of compensation. So when people left FNESU, the patterns, the big things that they noted were the livable wage. They felt like they were making closer to a livable wage where they were heading, and that the steps were different. And they talked about, a few people talked about in the districts that they're moving to, they're able to get more college coursework paid for by the district, shorter work days, and I can't see that last piece, Morgan.
Step placement.
Okay, step placement on there. You change this, there you go. Some of the things they valued, and I won't read all of these to you. You can see certainly connection and relationship is not surprising to us at all. And recommendations for improving the work. I mean, certainly compensation came out there. I think that the anticipated workload was going to be high on that list, and it definitely was. There were some recommendations around changes to mentoring, the amount of work that we've been trying to accomplish, and certainly COVID came up there, and the length of the work day as well. So this question we discovered is difficult to analyze because we don't ask them how long they've been in FNESU on this question, because we try to not ask them anything that would identify who they are. So when they're telling us how well supported they felt when they were a new teacher, this could be someone who was a new teacher 30 years ago, or it could be someone who was a new teacher this year or 5 years ago. So you can see most of them talked about feeling really well supported. They did have some recommendations around trainings and administrative presence in halls and classrooms and common places.
Lynn, to avoid that problem, could you perhaps break people into groups of, you've been at your position 0 to 5 years, how well did you feel supported as a new teacher, or you've been in that position 5 to 15 years, same question, and that might give you a little more not identifiable information, but more relevant information?
Yeah, we talked about that, and I think one of my wonderings is it important? How important? Because the more questions we ask, the closer we can get to identifying who is saying what. Because you can look at which school they worked at and what range of years. So we try not to ask anything where we can tie back. So we talked about this today. Actually, is it really important to know which school? Or is it really important to know what number of years? So, I mean, I think there's a way that we could work this question so that we could get, maybe the question is if you're new within X number of years, answer this question. But we're going to work on that, Lisa, because it wasn't helpful when we tried to analyze that part, we realized. So you can see the information is similar in the exit interviews that they did with Jamie. And I'm not gonna read through all of those. I think this was definitely the toughest year that people have faced in education, and we certainly felt that in the response. We did we skip one more? Can you go back one slide? And we also asked them about the strengths and assets within the community as well. Okay, now I'm ready. So some of the reasons for leaving FNESU or heading off to a different school, as you can see, it's the same as what they mentioned in one of the first questions. And then they've made some comments about how well supported they felt and what we could have done to entice them to stay. So there's some good information here that is, some of it is really actionable, and some of it is things we need to really take note of, some of the indicators that they're giving us through the survey.
Lynn, can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
What do you think, or what do you feel like people mean when they're talking about staff equity within the building?
So I think there were some comments. I'm wondering, I was putting two and two together. I was reading those and also pairing it with the stay interviews I did at the end of the year. And I think that it is hard. We try to do some shared leadership opportunities within the buildings. And it's a great way to develop leadership skills in some of our staff. And at the same time, I think that sometimes that it doesn't feel great for other people who are not in some of those shared leadership roles. So leading like professional learning community teams or sitting on a teacher leadership team within a school. So I did hear some of those things in my rounds at the end of the year with people, as they really felt like some people had information that other people didn't have. And I think that's not surprising. That's something that's pretty common that I've seen in schools that have some of those models.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that? Okay. So as part of our, we didn't have anything under student, so we'll jump right to the next one. As part of our, the SU board has developed 3 big goals for the organization. They're big 5-year goals. And part of our plan around those goals is a board monitoring plan. So you're going to see me bring data, more data than we've ever brought before to our meetings. And so you'll be seeing a level of data at these district meetings, and then there'll be different data, different but related, more detailed data that will be shared at the SU meetings. So we've taken the NMV specific standardized assessment results and unpacked those a little bit. And I want to, before I jump into this, just say this is extremely old data. This is from school year 2021. So this was on the heels of kids being home at the end of the 1920 school year, and many of them being in a hybrid model for that 2021 school year. So this testing happened in May of 2021. And these are results that we've recently gotten back from the agency. So we're hopeful that the assessments that our students took in 21-22 will receive the results of those more quickly than we receive these results. So we're hopeful that we'll have fresher data by December, so at least will represent this last school year. So I'm really looking at this data as we knew before we saw this data that we were going to see some gaps. We knew that there had been an impact on student learning as a result of lost instruction associated with the pandemic. So I'm trying to look at this data through the lens of this is our baseline and how do we move forward from here. And then we'll take another look later this year once we get the more recent data in. Does that make sense? Okay, go ahead, Morgan. So I'm starting off with math in this report, and so this is really an indicator. You can see across the bottom are the grade levels, 3rd through 8th grade. So this is taking a look of all your combined 3rd graders in NMV, for example. And you can see that the blue on the graph represents level 4, which is above proficiency on the SBAC assessment. Level 3 is at proficiency. Level 2, the yellow, is approaching, and level 3 is below. So I don't have that language exactly right. The principals are probably chuckling because I'm sure I missed the mark on some of what that language is, but it's essentially exceeding, meeting, nearly there, and not close yet. So this is really a composite of, if we just put all of our students together, this is what the data looks like in terms of proficiency. Go ahead to the next one, Morgan. I've asked, we have a data coordinator for the SU, it's Mary Ellis, and so she's helped me to compile some of this data, and we have a new assessment tool called EduClimber, where all of our standardized assessment and other assessments in our local comprehensive assessment plan get input into EduClimber now, are really just uploaded into EduClimber, and we're able to produce these reports. It's very helpful. We've never been able to produce anything like this. So she was able to take all of our schools again in NMV and really look at this one by gender. So you can see third grade, and it's very hard to see, but the first bar is third grade female, the second bar is third grade male. So there's a different number of males and females in each grade level, so you can see that and how high the bars are, but you're really looking at, percentage of the whole, looking at the difference between the performance of the female students and the male students in NMVUUSD. Go ahead on to the next one, Morgan. So this is, we disaggregate data like this so that we can see if we are dealing with any achievement gaps. So the previous slide, to see, are there things that we're noticing that are different between our female students and our male students in terms of proficiency acquisition? And it's the same when we're looking at poverty. So when we look at this information, the graph on the left are students who are not economically disadvantaged, and the way that's measured at the state is through, those would be students who would be doing paid lunch. They would not qualify for free and reduced lunch, and that's an income eligibility piece. So the data for our not economically disadvantaged students versus our economically disadvantaged students, you can see that there are significantly more students that are proficient in the not economically disadvantaged category than there are in the economically disadvantaged category. So we know by looking at that's something we need to attend to as leaders and as educators. Go ahead, Morgan. So now this shifts us into English language arts. So again, this starts with a composite of all NMV students. So you can see proficiency levels across the board by grade level. Okay, Morgan. And again, we took a look at economically disadvantaged versus not economically disadvantaged, and our students are far outperforming when they're not economically disadvantaged. So we know we have some work to do to close that achievement gap. Go ahead, Morgan. I put these out of order, sorry. Again, the first bar is female, the second bar is male by grade level to see if we see any discrepancy between gender performance. The final one is most fascinating to me. So this is data, and it's really measuring the percent proficiency, and it's looking at poverty, and it's looking at students with disabilities. So if you see the first bar, that is the percent proficient, and this is ELA. I don't have the same data for math. I can put my fingers on it. The first bar is all students, so percent proficiency. So when you look at the second bar, it's the number of students who they're economically disadvantaged, so they're living in poverty, but they do not have a disability. The third bar is students living in poverty with a disability. So you can see the the discrepancy when students are living in poverty, and then you can see when they're living in poverty and they have a disability, that's a pretty significant discrepancy. The fourth bar is if they have a disability but they're not living in poverty. We're definitely seeing the students with disabilities performing significantly lower. And then far to the right is students with no economic disadvantage and no disability.
Lynn, are those disabilities taken into consideration somehow and weighted on this, or is this just straight the same assessment given to all students, whether they're disabled or not, or economically?
This is straight SBAC. This is
So nobody
the
has
same
any accommodations, so it is
Oh
to
no,
be-
they do
No,
have.
they do.
So
They can't. I'm sorry, I cut you off on that.
yeah, no, that's okay. So there are accommodations for students with disabilities, and they're still scoring extremely low.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
But the accommodations aren't, and this is not like a defense of any of it, but they're being tasked with the exact same mathematics challenges as anybody else at that grade level.
So that was my original question.
That's kind of what you're
Yeah.
asking. There are other accommodations. There's reading support. Could be scribes, etc. But they're still working with the exact same questions,
Okay.
It's phrased the exact same way, with the exact same content.
Okay, thank
And
you.
So it used to be years ago, Lisa, when we had different standardized assessments, students could test off grade level, and you can no longer do that. All students are testing on grade level, and the only exception would be that 1 to 2% of students who really have significant cognitive disabilities, who you wouldn't anticipate that they'd be living independently as an adult. Those students get approved for a life skills assessment, so their assessment is a little different, but this measurement right here is only reporting out on SBAC data, so this is 99% of our students.
Okay, so like 1 to 2% are not taking the SBAC for that reason because they need life skills assessments instead.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Morgan. Is that the last? Okay, you can go back. Does anybody have any other questions about the data? I know that was kind of a quick walkthrough. I want us to, my intention in going through this with you tonight is to say, okay, that was our starting place a year ago. What is this going to look like when we see the data, when we get the 21-22 results? And then this kind of drives some of the work that we're doing. Each principal is doing this kind of a data dive and work with their staff related to the results that they get out of these assessments. So these conversations right now with you are at the district level, and then the leaders look at this data and they dissect it and talk about what the implications are at the school level as well.
So how does that work, for the individual child? Like, is there a threshold, and if they scored, certain or under a certain threshold, I mean, is there a focus then put back on that child?
So can you go back a couple slides, Morgan, to, yeah, that one's fine. So on the far right, Kat, that's called a scale score. So you're seeing the compilation of many students, but we can dig in and we can get to the individual student level so that we can see what the scale score is for that student overall. But we also can get reports that break it down into the skill level. So it's somewhat useful data, but the challenge with this assessment is that we get the results so far after when they take the assessment that it's not considered accurate anymore because so much time has passed. So when we're looking at the more actionable data, those are some of the assessments that we have on our local comprehensive assessment plan. And so the teachers that are, giving the different assessments along the way, whether it's the math, the primary number and operations assessment, or, it might be, principals help me out, I'm drawing complete the Fountas and Pinnell assessment. It's called the F&P that measures early literacy. There are a bunch of different assessments, and so the teachers then take that and dissect, and that would be helpful in terms of immediate response and using that to provide some more targeted intervention to
And
students.
the way I've always been told to look at the SBAC data is more around how it reflects on the effectiveness of your curriculum. So a lot of our conversations are digging into what were some patterns of things that were missed by the larger group of kiddos, and then we ask those questions of like, did we not teach it? Did we not teach it well? Did we not get to it? And that's kind of what this is a tool for us, is to evaluate the effectiveness of the curriculum more so than anything diagnostic to any individual kiddo.
Lynn, I have a quick question. So given that we're identifying that there's a degree of learning loss specifically related to COVID, and then we're needing to kind of strategize interventions to kind of support where the kiddos need support, are we able to enhance and fund some of those interventions through ESSER funding, through some of the pandemic funding? Because this is, there's a bit of a through line here with this set of data related to COVID.
We absolutely can fund, and we have funded the strategies associated with responding to learning loss for students. So there's been money that has gone into our before school, after school, summer programming, tutoring. There's money available for us to build upon our MTSS systems in our schools. The unfortunate part is, this is so strange. It's not been our reality ever in education. It isn't about the money anymore. It's about the humans, and we can fund positions, but we cannot physically find people to take those teaching jobs. We've never been in this position before, so we're really in a place where we're having to really look at what are our systems and structures and how are we responding in our buildings with the staff that we currently have. So we certainly can buy the resources, and we've purchased the programs, we've purchased the brand new books, highly engaging text, off level texts that are high interest but off level. So we're trying to be responsive to the data and invest, especially in the literacy. We've invested also a lot in teacher development in literacy instruction and teacher development. The teacher development in literacy has been geared towards that pre-K through 2 grade level. In grades 3 through 12 we've really targeted math instruction by partnering with the All Learners Network. So it's a lot of work that's been going on around our response plan, our continuous improvement plan, really targeted at trying to fill some of these gaps.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else? Okay. So I'm going to shift to the next piece, and this is something, Mary, you and I had talked about, having a conversation about 8th grade class trips. And one of the side effects of merger is that merger happened and we got about 5 months of practice as a merged system, and then the world changed with the pandemic. So we never have really had a whole school year without a really significant pandemic response to get all the way through and be able to be thoughtful about how do we as a merged system address our end of the year 8th grade class trips. So we're bringing this back for conversation because we really haven't had a traditional 8th grade class trip in several years because we haven't been able to travel out of state, and with the restrictions around COVID in masking and contact tracing and all those things, they're we're really limited. So now we're hopeful we're in a year that we hope we can end in a different place than we have for the last 3. And we're hopeful that all of these lovely principals will have the opportunity with their 8th graders to be planning some class trips. So this is an opportunity for the board to have a conversation about the existing policy and what you would like to see in terms of the class trips for these schools. So I've linked in there the overnight class trip policy. So I think you had that in your board agenda so that you can link in there and take a look. There have been conversations in the past. I think Sandy, you might be the only principal, Sandy or Lenny maybe, that would remember, but there were conversations. We looked at this policy, I feel like right before COVID, and some things were changed about duration and mileage, distance. So bring this back for you to review, and not asking the board to necessarily do the policy work, but if there's something in your discussion that you feel like isn't well represented within the policy, the board can ask us to bring this policy back to the committee. So I'll give you a minute to just take a look at that, principles too, and then let's just open up this conversation.
Lynn, if we're ready for discussion, I'd like to start.
Okay.
Just so the board knows, the policy committee has worked really extensively on this policy, and lots of different topics came up during that discussion. It was all pre-pandemic, as Lynn said, so we were living in a totally different time then. And pretty much the world was our oyster, and how did we condense it down to make it doable for FNESU, for students who live in a rural area to be able to get outside this area and experience something different, something exciting, and something that they could work towards and be rewarded with, because it does say in here that it is a privilege, it's not a right that a student go on one of these trips. So I'm really comfortable with this policy because I worked on the very first one that the Berkshire School Board had set up for the Berkshire School years ago, and I'm not even sure if any other schools had one at that time. So I feel like this covers a lot of the big questions that each school may have wanted to decide independently of each other, and it brings us together as a district so that we're all on the same page to start, and then each school can personalize their trip as they wish within the guidelines of this policy.
I know for Sheldon, 8th grade last year, they did do a class trip in which we traveled to, it was called Riding High Ranch in New York. My daughter was in 8th grade, so I was a part of the fundraising and just going through the motions. I was actually the employee on the trip, and I know that we referred to this policy a lot because it's clear, it's concise. It helped guide our selection of where we went, what was expected of chaperones, what was expected of students. It's not overly informative, it's very black and white. I thought it was super helpful. The only thing that I noticed, and this is a post-pandemic topic,
Morgan, I accidentally muted the library. I was trying to mute myself, and I don't know how to unmute you, so I can't hear anything.
You're up, Emily.
You were at the but one thing.
But
You got all the way to the but.
Okay. I know the morning of departure, we all met at the school, and there were a few students who attended virtual academy who didn't get the same level of communication and correspondence, or they felt opportunity to be engaged in the 8th grade class. So there was some topic of, are you part of this 8th grade class? Are you not? Should you go? Should you not? In this event, sadly, we weren't able to allow them to come because they hadn't done anything that needed to be done. Permission slips, it threw our numbers off, the ratios. It was really unfortunate. So that, I think, post-pandemic would be the only thing that I could think of that would be helpful to add to this policy, is for those kids who are in attendance of the virtual academy. I was heavily involved with the fundraising. I went into the school and asked the students, where do you want to go? We gave them a handful of options, things that adhered to this policy, and they all voted, and I think they felt powerful in their vote. They started at Great Escape, and then they kind of talked amongst themselves, and then made the change to do this Ride and High Ranch. I know there was some question around, should we go out of state? Should we stay overnight? We are still, battling a pandemic. Does this make sense? And everybody felt strongly, parents and kids alike, that they wanted the opportunity. It was an incredible trip. I had a couple hiccups. I mean, as you can imagine, a whole bunch of 8th graders could have. But other than that, it was a really fun trip. So I think this policy is really good.
I have a question, Emily.
Yeah.
If, because it was during a pandemic and it was out of state, if
Mhm.
New York State had changed their rules or Vermont had changed their rules,
Yep.
would you have had a provision in place for the students to do something different at the last minute?
I think if that was a possibility at that point in time, absolutely. I think the students also would have been willing to wear masks if that was what was asked of them. I think they still wanted to go.
You said this past June was when you
Yeah.
went?
Yeah.
Okay, I was
Yep.
thinking it was the year
Yep.
before that, because the year before that would have
Still
been
kinda
much,
complicated.
Yeah,
it
for
would have
sure.
been
Yep,
much
for sure.
harder to
So,
go out of state.
How did you feel it played out from an equity standpoint as far as fundraising and making sure everything could go? and
Yeah.
that sort of thing?
We had a wonderful, we'll call her a leader of the pack, Chrissy Bolcash, who had an older daughter that graduated a couple years prior, so she was fundraising queen. She set up a comedy show. We did bottle drive. We did craft sales, bake sale. I mean, I'm like, when do you sleep? But she raised a lot of money. It was an expensive trip, but it didn't matter which parent helped, who did, who didn't. It was, here's our number of kids, who wants to go, who doesn't, and then we made sure that we could afford for everybody to go. So it worked out really well. I know we do a Comedy for a Cause fundraiser at the Abbey that raised a significant amount of money. And one of the joys of this specific location is meals are included. So you don't have to worry about extra meals and paying for X, Y, and Z. It was like a cafeteria where you go and you all sit together and you order your food, and it was included in the cost. So I think a venue like that, and just future planning, looking at venues for principals, that was a godsend for sure. Not having to pack everybody up and leave every time you needed to have a meal was nice. One thing that just jumped out to me is, I think if there's a student who might have emotional or behavioral struggles, it would be worth having a conversation of who is going to support them on this trip, because we had an individual, it was nothing significant, but still just needed some guidance, some calm down time, some guidance. He was really ramped up because he was super stoked to be on this trip. But I think having a support person or even their parent there would have been super helpful. We were lucky to have a really able parent who had this individual in their group who was able to manage it, but I feel like it could have gone another way. So I think that's also a consideration.
So do you think
Emily,
that's something
that's kind of a.
I just want to
Go
know
ahead,
if you
Lisa.
thought that was something the principal should identify ahead of time.
Absolutely, and I know that there was some conversation around so me as the employee, if you will, / parent, the responsibility of that employee is a little bit different than the parents who are going. So I asked, what is expected of me if someone's struggling, if someone's kind of off the rails and needs X, Y, and Z? It would be helpful to have some information, whether it's some sort of, try these tips and tricks when someone is escalated, what have you. It didn't get to that level of conversation. We were able to manage, but I think it would be helpful for whoever that school employee is on the trip to be fully prepared with some sort of intervention plan, if need be, to support that student.
So this is exactly part of the conversation that I wanted to bring up, because I think that we never had the opportunity to have this conversation pre-merger because, in merger, because those trips didn't happen. But I think one of the intentions of this policy is to make sure that these are school-led trips, and to make sure that it's so helpful when we have parents that are active in fundraising and willing to volunteer to go on the trips. I think that there is part of this policy is about approval of those fundraising efforts and about how we manage those funds, where those funds live, whose responsibility is it, like what's the timeline for getting those funds back in. So I think that the intention of the policy is to make sure that we're all on the same page about, this is, school-led trip, school-led fundraising, and certainly encouraging that parent participation. Your point, Emily, is really critical about the school employee, and I wish that you hadn't been put in that situation, because I think it is so important for students too to have someone who actually works at the school, and not diminishing your role on the board. I think that it was great that you took that on last year, but I think that it's so critical that when the kids go have this experience and they're having their end of the year class trip, there needs to be school staff assigned the duty and responsibility of being in charge of that trip.
Lynn, can I just jump into that? Having done overnight trips with classes, I think one person from staff is low, that you need someone else if something happens, that one can take care of it. So the thought of it, 2 staff people who would be responsible. My other question is equity as far as chaperones. If chaperones are required to pay their own way, that really limits your people who are economically disadvantaged from having their parent be a part of the experience.
In my old school, they fundraise for the kids first, and then if there was still time, they would fundraise for the chaperones.
That's why I'm wondering if it doesn't read to me like that's an option. I don't know.
We have never taken that stance. We have this is a conversation for the board, but our stance has always been that we fundraise for kids, that we don't, because the community gets hit by fundraisers, whether it's the elementary school or the high school. It feels like, in a typical year, you're getting asked to buy gold cards and candles and cookie dough and all kinds of things. So we've never taken the stance that we would fundraise for adults.
I think something that would be helpful, if we're looking at that, would be to have some sort of a roadmap or a timeline of when you're requesting your trip, when you're collecting data around who wants to go, how many parents want to go. And if you do that earlier in the year rather than later, it will give you more time to raise money, plan money, and have expectations of deadlines for X, Y, and Z. I think that would be super helpful if we hadn't have had the parent involvement that we did, especially for that one parent. She drove the whole thing, and we're all like, how are you doing this?
My question still though, we have a lot of families who live paycheck to paycheck, and no matter how well they budget, they're not going to have that little extra or pretty good chunk for a trip.
We raise extra, knowing that. But I think it would, if you were to get a tally of which parents want to go and start those conversations sooner rather than later, you can kind of have it more in stone. Okay, we need to raise funding for 4 parents, 5 parents, what have you, if you did it.
So
at
that
the
is a
beginning of the year.
possibility.
I would think so.
I mean, I think
Well, it's not been a possibility in our existing policy. I think where this is tricky, Emily, is we're talking about, how it was handled in Sheldon, and it was not necessarily aligned to the way the policy is written here. So that's part of the reason to have this conversation is, if we're going to do that, that should be something that we're consistent across the district with. Like, if we're going to allow people to fundraise for adults, I think we need to be transparent about that. And is it that you're going to fundraise for all adults, or you're going to fundraise for the adults that have a hardship and they can make a request that they have a hardship?
Yeah, that makes sense. We just had an abundance of funding. It wasn't the intent last year to fundraise. Every single parent who went, including myself, cut a check to go on that trip, and there was no discussion or expectation that you would be reimbursed or your trip would be paid for.
How many kids went, and then how many didn't go?
I feel like we had like 18 kids-ish, maybe 20. There was a handful that didn't go. Not
Because
even.
I just have a lot of concerns around, again, the equity and the question of who
wants to go and that it needs to be presented in a way, and I totally hear that every school community is going to be different, but as far as if you ask, all the parents, all the kids who wants to go, there might be kids or parents who just simply say no because they know they don't have the money, or that kid has to be home every night to watch their little siblings. So also, again, like Montgomery, the DC trip was amazing for a lot of years, but that's like a huge ask, and I just think there's people that don't have the money, don't want their kids going overnight, can't have their kids going overnight. So also making sure that the event itself is really inclusive and not excluding anybody.
Well, and I'll add specific to historically in Montgomery, that DC trip, which, was roughly $800, at least by the time my last child was doing it. It didn't used to be quite so much. That the fundraising was largely individual for the family. And it wasn't this kind of community effort that Emily's talking about, which I think is a better way, because it's challenging in a small rural town when every child's trying to get the same people to buy the same magazines, the same pizza dough, the same cookie dough, the same holiday wrapping paper, that I think I wasn't alone in the parents that were like, this is so much work to raise such a kind of, relative to the cost of the trip, small amount of money, and there was an absolute hardship.
Sorry.
We never did big, not until one of my kids, we did like a big kind of spaghetti dinner, but that was kind of new. Before it was really kind of down to the individual, and folks who have a lot of family and big, a lot of people to draw on for the fundraisers would be able to do that a little more gracefully than folks who don't have a lot of family. And so that it kind of speaks to some of the challenges and inequities around when the fundraising onus is entirely on the child and their parents.
Absolutely.
As opposed to a community effort where you're really kind of trying to collect a fund that is then going to be disseminated equitably to support the folks who can't raise the money on their own and can't pay for it out of pocket.
For sure.
So Mary, that's a good segue into the conversation you and I had in our pre-meeting is, I kind of want to go through what we had in that outline. So we had talked about the duration and distance so that we didn't have something like, a 5-nighter in one town and no overnight in another. And then, I know historically we've had some places that have tried to go pretty far for these class trips. So some of that is outlined in existing policy. We also talked about what is the stance of the NMV board, and is it something that, as you're moving into your budgeting season, is it something that you want to discuss doing something? You already have some money that you have in your budget for field trips, and is that something you want to look at and say, we want to have an 8th grade line, and maybe we want to earmark a certain number of dollars per pupil at the 8th grade level for that trip. Another thing we talked about, which has already come up, is just the equitable access piece. So students shouldn't be excluded from this trip because their families can't afford to pay for them to attend. And then the important part that I really wanted Morgan to weigh in on is just these are the places that school systems sometimes get themselves in trouble because the accounting gets questionable. So it is really important that we are tight on that. So just in regard to like how that works when you have a fundraiser and whose hands are on the money and how quickly does that get turned in and what accounting process do we have. So we just need to make sure that people are following that. And then part of the conversation that we had, Mary, also was around the service versus product, and that is a little bit of where you were going, that it's harder if you don't have people that will come buy your cookie dough because you have no family, but you are willing to work at a family dinner or a pancake breakfast with Santa or a community lawn sale or comedy for a cause thing. So thinking about fundraising through a different lens, maybe than what we have in the past, so that it's more of a service to our community than we're asking you to purchase these things that you may or may not want.
I just have a quick question about the policy. When you wrote the miles allowed, did you take into account that we have an international border within 300 miles, and are we going to allow?
We have allowed in the past.
Okay.
But that was part of it because one of the trips went really far away. Actually, a couple of the trips have gone far away. I'm a veteran of 8 class trips, overnight class trips, multiple nights each one. And this is going to be a really unpopular stance, even though I worked really hard on this policy. I'm not a big fan of overnight class trips, and I'm really not a fan of using school budget money for overnight class trips. I think if we have to delve into the school budget for this, or if we have to set aside money in a line item for a class trip, it should be field trips, educational field trips that are not overnight class trips. So I'm definitely not in favor of a line item such as Lynn was suggesting could be an option. If classes do want to continue going on overnight class trips, there needs to be a way for the whole community to participate. Kat brought up some of the equity questions that have nothing really to do with economics, but with family values. Some families don't want their children going on overnight trips at that age. Some families are unable to do that because they need to help out at home. I mean, I know there aren't very many kids that work on farms, but some kids have jobs at age 13, which 8th graders are. So there are a number of opportunities why children can't participate on overnight class trips, or their families don't want them to participate on overnight class trips. There are religious reasons. You know, it might be a really important weekend at your church or synagogue or wherever. And I just feel like Kat does that it could be a great opportunity, but it also could be a really difficult situation for a family. So yes, the policy is in place. It works. We've referred to it. Sheldon referred to it, but I'm not a huge fan of it.
I'm gonna sort of echo and then contradict two of the things that Lisa said. I think kind of where you were going with the inequity is spot on, and there are some things that are within your control as a board. You can get rid of the financial inequity. Parents not wanting their kids to go, or the kid who's got to be a sitter for their younger sibling. You've got no ability to change that. So I don't think you as a board need to worry about that. To kind of echo what Lynn said, I would be happy, and your auditors would be happy, if the school is doing no fundraising at all. And in a $40 million budget across the 2 districts in the SU, we can probably find funds for some of these things. I know there's a lot of difference in the type of fundraising, and that if, when I buy the $25 gold card, maybe the school gets 50 cents on that, or $1. But if somebody's doing a spaghetti dinner, they're getting most of that profit. So I know there's a difference. But just the accounting and just the risk to the district, and the time spent with some of these kids, schlepping the stuff around that they're selling, we'd love to see all that going.
So we didn't sell anything, other than raffle tickets at a door. I think that was kind of a stance that we took. It was, you have to work the craft show, you have to work at the comedy show, you have to collect bottles. So I feel like there is an element of a lesson and teaching. If this is something that you want to do, then you need to raise the funding for it. But you do need a strong parent group. And there are several kids, I think, who went, who might not have had the funding to go should they have had to pay themselves. There were work issues. There was a single mom who was an LNA, and she couldn't she couldn't go even though she wanted to, but couldn't get off work. All the parents said, well, we'll take you, hop in my car. I have a 7-seater. I think if the parents are willing, and this can vary, year to year, district to district, what have you, school to school, but having a strong parent group is necessary. We did the fundraising. The parents did. The school didn't do the fundraising. And we managed the budget. We kept a spreadsheet, and we weren't selling goods. We were offering services. And I think there was a sense of pride that came from the kids as a result of that. And to just watch the kids. We did 2 nights. I was a little bit nervous myself. It's just such a broad array of kids and personalities and stuff going on at home, and how do you all get together and make it a good trip. I saw kids hanging out together and playing tennis and riding horses with one another that they would have never hung out with one another, I think, in a normal circumstance. So I think there were some pretty big lessons learned on this trip. This is just the one trip I've observed, so I'm sure trips have gone not so well in years past. But
I think it's different if you go to a destination like you did,
correct.
where everybody is in one place doing whatever is offered there, period, versus going somewhere and everybody's like, okay, we're here, we're at an amusement park, one group goes here, another group goes there, another group goes there. There's not a whole lot of team bonding on that. And the Berkshire class trip started out many years ago. I don't even know how many, 30, at a ranch like that. My kids were not old enough that they went on that trip, so it has to be a long time ago. But I heard nothing but good about that trip.
Yeah, I mean, ours is set up as it's a year-long fundraising process, and it's like all the fundraising activities are kind of part of the build-up to the trip. And there's also a lot of different opportunities, like working at the snack bars or other places for people to help contribute to it. And we've also been mindful about that fundraising piece. On the accounting side, I know that's where it gets a little dicey, making sure we get all the money where it's supposed to go, but that the cost has not been prohibitive to somebody. And the other piece too is, and again, we know, as Maureen was saying, like, we can't necessarily control what parents do and don't like, but one of the things that we do is it's make sure it's organic, it's what the kids want, so they have to work on identifying what they want to do, they do their presentations, the kids collectively vote on it. So some parents could not like it for A, B, or C reasons, but it's like, this is what the group kind of went with. And I actually know this year, I believe this year we might be leaning more towards not an overnight trip, but a day trip, which is a lot easier in a lot of different ways, but I think that's what that group might want to do. We did notice maybe like a longer day trip, but again, that brings up stuff too. But like if we left at 6, got back at 7, they could get a full day out somewhere rather than do the overnight piece.
A day trip is still, to me, entirely different than an overnight trip, so I kind of disagree with you, Morgan, that, I mean, yeah, we can't control what other families are going to do, but we can make it more accessible to more kids if it's a day trip versus overnight. And I think what Emily's describing is awesome, but it sounds like pretty unique to like that group of parents. Like you had a really strong group.
No, it went on for several years. We've had several classes.
Just maybe every class at Sheldon, like the parents are going to be really involved, but like not every school is kind of where I'm coming from. Is necessarily going to be.
It's definitely communicated to them. It's, if you want to be a part of this, you need to be here. So, I mean, we were strong in communications. There was letters, there was emails, there was phone calls. We had a Facebook chat. Some parents didn't say a word. Some parents came to, like, no meetings at all. We heard nothing from them, but they showed up with their kids on the morning and said, thank you so much for all you've done. Even those are probably the kids that probably wouldn't have been people otherwise.
That's probably what you didn't.
But if you communicate it at the beginning of the school year, I mean, I think if there's a will, there's a way.
I mean, I think the one thing I very much value the overnight field trips, and I would love to keep making them happen. But the one thing I will say is just a thorn in my side is the supervision between 10:30 and 4:30 at night. That's the part that is always a little scary, and like one of us, you have more than one team member, and when we did a very big overnight trip with Milton, there were some adults who for the right reasons, like really didn't get any sleep because A, we could hear what the heck was going on, and we had to like stagger, like, hey, I'm gonna sleep from here to here, somebody else needs to be up, because that's the place that I think you hope that things go well, but that's you're responsible for a lot of other people's babies outside of a school environment, and it's that time of night that gets kind of nerve-wracking. If there was anything that actually I'm really uncomfortable with, that is it. But it's so far, it's always been good. But
It's risky for sure. Our trip was not without some bumps. We had a young man who was up all night long. All night.
the one kid who's not supposed to have Mountain Dew and he smuggles in about 14 bottles of it. He's having a
Pretty
great
much.
time.
Pretty much. That and epic
Yeah.
video games.
But
Like,
so
yeah.
Morgan, you're saying then like you want the budget to support field trips and not fundraising? Like in a perfect world, is that what I'm hearing?
On an
Because I
accounting
also
standpoint.
think that kids can participate, rather than having it directly tied, and maybe this doesn't make sense, but like one of the requirements to go then as a child is not that you fundraise, but you're doing some kind of community service. So there is still this sense of community and that you had to do something to get the trip. And my other question is, we're really focused on 8th grade, and I know COVID threw everything to the wayside, but are all the other grade levels experiencing like field trips? Like I know it's an apple orchard, but like cultural events. I know they went to the Flynn sometimes, but does that typically happen every grade level?
Well, I'd like to just speak to debaters because I agree with Lisa on a lot of the field trips. We, in the past, and I haven't been there the last couple of years, I retired. Bakersfield had field trips throughout the year for different events, apple season, harvest festival. But the end of the year always seemed to be like this celebration the year is over and not an educational piece or a limited educational piece. And I just feel that that shouldn't come out of our budget, a play day. That if we're going to do it, then it is something like Emily did where it does bring that whole social emotional back around, that teamness, that all together. We used to do a trip with 7th graders that was overnight, and it was a camping trip. And that was the intent, that they would be our leaders as 8th graders, and it was time to come together. So we need to be very mindful of why we're going where we're going.
I almost think that reminds me that somewhere along the line at the beginning of 8th grade, one of the schools did a trip somewhere, a class bonding trip. Lynn, are you remembering this at all?
Like a ropes course, obstacle course?
Something
bonding.
that
Andre
signified,
met.
30 years ago.
but it seemed to me it was multi-day.
I feel like Andre Messier took them to
Yeah.
whitewater rafting
Yes.
and ropes course.
And it was at the beginning of the 8th grade year, so that they could be the school leaders, and they had bonded as a team, I think, if I'm remembering this correctly. It was very cool. I didn't know anybody who went on those trips, but I was on the board at the time, and it was a cool idea. And similar situation. It was for a reason other than, yay, we're done. Which I think is great for high school seniors. I'm just less enthusiastic about 8th graders having the
And I
same
do feel strongly
experience.
that, and I think that the principals would agree that there needs to be an educational component to something like this, and whether it's the SEL piece or, I know they have not, I have not seen anyone plan recently anything that has been solely just, we're gonna theme park and that's the only thing that we're going to do. I mean, reminding people we're getting back to what this policy was and trying to be consistent in terms of that equity piece, I think is important. Mary, that was really centered, and it sounds like it's consistent with the rest of the board that we want to make sure no one is turned away because of the money piece. I think the other piece, just based on auditor feedback, and I know this feels hard, Emily, especially given some things that you've said, is we have to get a handle on the accounting. If we are not careful with the accounting, that's an exposure liability for the district. So it has to fall under the realm of school if there's any fundraising that happens. Parents can still take a lead in those things, but the accounting has to be done through the appropriate chain. And Morgan, I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that, but I think that if my instinct tells me Morgan making the statement that he'd rather see it all in the budget is because of that worry about the exposure when we put this kind of out there. I'd like to think no one has any bad intentions, and I'm certainly pointing fingers at no one. I just know that this is where schools sometimes get themselves in trouble.
So I know we've been questioned in the past about the audited procedures of class trip finances. For years, it was kind of the specter in the background. But one thing I do want to say is that we need to be very, very mindful about what we put in the budget. People are being stretched like they've never been stretched before financially coming up this year. People's fuel oil costs, people's gasoline costs, people's everything costs, food costs, everything is getting really, really expensive. People just can't afford to have another line item in the budget going towards something that they're seeing is purely celebratory or non-educational. And that's where I'm coming from on this, regardless of the overnight piece, any trip.
Yeah.
We need to be very, very mindful about what we're paying for, the experience that we're paying for, and make it worthwhile for our taxpayers.
I hear that, and I just kind of respectfully disagree that we couldn't find a way to honor our kind of fiscal obligations to the taxpayers while also honoring the kind of tradition of an 8th grade trip. I mean, we have line items in the budget as it stands right now. It's not exorbitant. That field trip, the existing line item, it is pretty nominal in the scope of an SU budget that approaches $40 million. So I think there's tremendous value in the trips, and I think that historically, a lot of thought and intention has gone into a really positive, engaging 8th grade trip that has elements that are purely fun and elements that are educational, elements that kind of are a wonderful way to kind of wrap up your K through 8 experience in our district. I'm like, for the same reason that you're highlighting the strain that families are under as far as the education tax bill, the same families might like to see their children have this kind of unique experience outside of Franklin County, and they can't afford it without a little bit of community buy-in and support vis-a-vis the budget. So
Well, don't forget the budget comes from taxes.
well, sure, but that doesn't necessarily mean that our economically disadvantaged families, yes, of course, they're paying taxes and they're part of that budget too, that then can be stressful when your tax bill is due. But I feel as though a lot of these families also want to see their children have this experience of the 8th grade trip, and they might be really hamstringed by some of the fundraising opportunities. So
I also wonder, when we're talking about fundraising, and I'm not sure how, I could be opening a can of worms, but our PTO sports, pre-K through 4, every equipment, ball, net, cone, t-shirts, it's all paid for by parent fundraising and the PTO fundraising. So is that fundraising looked at differently than this 8th grade class trip from an accounting?
No, it's not looked at differently, but I don't think it's the same in every school.
I was gonna say, I think the
Yeah.
PTO is very different at every school.
Yeah.
So if we look
Our
at,
ranks
if we look at the
have
accounting practices of any PTO, if that goes well, because I know that our town would be in deep trouble without PTO fundraising. We do moms, we do wrapping paper, we do, I'm sure everybody's doing all that. So what is the process for accounting? I mean, is there a way to put someone in charge of the account to make sure that this parent group, what have you, adheres to the same process?
Well, that would have to be the school employee who advises the trip.
Sure.
in my case, like under the 8th grade, I put out an email to the 8th grade team, and anyone who works with the 8th grade, who's willing to be the advisor for the trip. There hasn't been a response.
I think I want to just clarify, Emily, because I think I'm hearing something from you that certainly wasn't my intent. There is no, like, the value of parent participation can't be measured like that. It's so important, and it is really remarkable what you were able to accomplish in Sheldon last year. I think that my point in this is not to exclude parents, but to say that the responsibility piece, the fiscal responsibility, when it's a school trip, no matter how you couch it, it's still a school trip. So the responsibility for that needs to lie there, and so all that funding needs to go through the accounting. I think that the rules are a little bit different for formalized PTOs, and Morgan, I don't know if you want to talk about the PTO, PTA. They can incorporate themselves, and they can have their own checkbook and their own accounting, and that is a little bit separate. But when it comes to class trips, I see that as very different. That parent participation is super, super duper important, but just the funding part needs to come in through the general fund.
That was something we had to start doing a couple of years ago, right? When there was an accounting recommendation that we had to close those student
Special
accounts.
accounts,
Yeah.
yeah.
You have to use those recording sheets, those accounting sheets after your fundraisers and things like that. So this is kind of leftover. I think that happened right before Sheldon came with us. So we just need to tighten that part up in principles. We can talk about that piece separately offline. But those are just the places that Mary and I talked in preparation for this meeting that we needed to kind of get out and just talk through as we're going into what we hope is a more normal year.
So what do you
Mary,
want
where
from
do I
us?
go from?
Well, I'm curious. So, Lisa, I'm just curious. Do you object to the field trip line item that's already?
No, if it's
what's
an
the
educational,
delineation between the 8th grade trip and us supporting in the budget regular field trips for
Yeah,
students?
the regular field trips have been line items forever on the budget, and they're educational. I don't even think I can think of a field trip that wasn't educational, but I can certainly think of an 8th grade trip or more that was not educational. And you don't have to go overnight to have educational experiences, especially when you're a 13-year-old or a 12-year-old. So no, I really don't think, and I'm speaking for Berkshire taxpayers that I know best, I really don't know that there are going to be that many that are going to support that in a school budget if it comes to be.
Do you mean an overnight trip specifically?
Specifically,
Okay.
if the 8th graders want to go on a trip to a museum, I'm sure that people will support that. But if the 8th graders just want to go to an amusement park and the community is being asked to support that through a line item in the budget, I don't think that's going to fly.
I guess I don't understand why. Like, I don't really understand why, like,
What's
us,
the education of
why
going
us support.
to
I mean, there's
an amusement park? What's the educational value besides getting out of Franklin County?
I don't know that it has to have a like distinct educational value to be like to still be a great experience that is a highlight of a kid's year. Like I
Sure.
don't know that it has to be so cut and dry.
Sure, I'm
like
not
that.
disagreeing with you that it would be a great experience, but when people are struggling to pay their fuel bills and people can't put gas in their car or buy food at the grocery store, they're probably not going to want to fund a trip for students just to go and have fun, especially if it's an expensive trip that involves mileage. And let's face it, there aren't that many places that close to Vermont, to Berkshire, to Sheldon, to Franklin, whatever, that they could really choose to go. I mean, it's always been a big trip, like going to Boston or going to Washington.
Would it be best, because I understand both sides of it, I am curious to have some data to look at if Morgan could get some estimates of like I actually think it's probably in total 20,000 across all of the trips. So $20,000 to your $40 million budget. It can be a
What is
great
20?
it can be a great talking
cost
point
of
for
the
people
trip.
to get mad about. But the funding line would be, I can't imagine ours was like, I'm saying 20,000 across four
Like all four
schools. It's
schools?
probably less than that. I'm just giving, that was my high number. And I think as a talking point, it's a great thing for certain people to complain about. But as far as how much it moves your tax burden, it's non-existent.
I think it's the concept of it, Lenny. I get it that $20,000 out of 40 million isn't a lot of money. It's a drop in the bucket. But people were afraid of this when we merged to begin with. They were afraid that we had this huge budget and 20,000 here, 50,000 there. It's not going to matter. And that's exactly what I'm hearing tonight is that, yeah, we can slip this in and it's not really going to matter because a lot of people don't even pay their property taxes because they have a prebate.
Income sensitivity.
Yeah, income sensitivity. So it's falling to a very small number of people who I hear from all the time in my other role, wearing my other hat, that taxes are too high and we don't get important things for our taxes, and we're spending our tax money on things that are crucial to the survival of families. And I can't support it being in the budget, but I certainly will be part of the discussion and listen and try to explain to people who might ask me what this is all about.
I really want to see numbers, like Lenny said. I want to see what the line item has been historically, and then if we could get data from all of the schools, like, pre-COVID or whatever, what typically was each school spending annually once all the fundraising came in to support this trip. And then once you look at that, is it going from a line item of 5,000 to 20,000? Is it 5,000 to 50,000? Because we have no idea what we're talking about at this point. Just money
Yeah, I
wise.
think
But
that-
I agree with you, Lisa, that it needs to make sense.
And I also think trips like Montgomery has historically done, I don't know if you're planning to still do them in Montgomery, but every student in Vermont should get a chance to go to the capital of Vermont and see how things work, and the capital of the United States. And if the schools somehow want to be able to try to fund something like that, that to me is very, very different than going and staying at a hotel and swimming in a hotel pool and going to an amusement park and riding the rides and eating junk food. So we're not really talking apples and apples here amongst the four different schools. And what Sheldon did is a really unique experience that Berkshire used to do, and I see that as a bonding opportunity.
And we're going to, again, we just didn't these last few years, and they got ahead of it last year and did it, and I still wanted to wait until all the COVID stuff, because I was worried about if we got to X point and then all of a sudden we weren't going to be able to go.
Right, but I think I was talking more about a destination like that where students can experience something that they can't experience at home, but yet it has the component of them bonding with each other, and I really like the idea of doing it before the end of their 8th grade year so that they can be, like Arlene said, school leaders because of their shared experience. That to me is also very educational. But to do something just as a send-off from the community,
And that's happened.
that's a lot of money.
That's happened, that there've just been an I didn't realize that some groups have just gone to an amusement park, you're saying? What group, what school?
I've
When that
never been
happened?
on a class trip that I would call overnight 8th grade class trip that I would call entirely educational.
Well, historically
agree
in
with you,
Montgomery,
Lisa. I
they've
think
been educational, mostly, as
Lynn's
well as
been
a
on
lot
some
of
of the
fun.
ones I've been on.
But, and I was not suggesting to be cavalier with padding out a budget with the class trip. I'm just was suggesting that we look at it in order for these to be equitable and accessible experiences for all of our kids.
And we are coming into budget season, right? So this is the time to talk about it, but we definitely would need to see hard numbers and what that money would go towards. Like I really would not vote for $20,000 to be a blank line item that says overnight class field trip. I would
So I
definitely
think
want-
that's a good segue, Lisa, because this conversation went in a direction that I did not anticipate. I will say that. This was to
Really?
introduce this, yeah, shocking, introduce this conversation, and, you know, try to get us to have some of this challenging dialogue about where do we go from here with this. I never heard when we were talking about the planning for this meeting any intention from my part, Morgan's part, or Mary's part to fully fund anyone's class trip. But we did talk about, is there a contribution that the board would want to consider? This was really about like the theory, the idea of getting this out there to begin a discussion, but you're gonna start looking at actual budgets in October and November. So we do not want to wait to have that conversation until then. These principals are gonna move forward this year with planning their trips. I'm going to encourage them to follow policy. I'm not hearing that you are wanting to make any modifications to policy, so that is really what I was trying to get at in that first part, and you can take up the budget piece in your October, November planning meetings. Definitely heard a common theme about that equitable access, and principals, we're going to get crystal clear about the accounting piece just so that we're all on the same page.
And I'm just gonna say that I think it's a yes and. I mean, that would be the ideal situation. Yes, we have really engaged fundraising efforts with a lot of buy-in from the kids and from their families, and potentially there is some money set aside if those fundraising efforts fall short and there is a risk that because of a family's financial situation, that child would be excluded from the trip. I was never suggesting that the board would fully fund the 8th grade trips across all 4 schools in the district.
I just think this in itself excludes people out the gate, and that's what I'm gonna say on it. Because like Emily said, and I don't wanna read into it too much, but I think the people that don't come forward are the people that, for whatever the reasons are, financial, personal, lifestyle, they don't want their kids to go overnight. So I mean, I still think this policy is.
No, we had every kid go.
I've worked on a lot of
You
field
said there
trips.
was like a handful that didn't go.
There were kids who were at the virtual academy and people that didn't go. I'm talking about the parents who didn't attend the fundraising meeting.
So every
single
grader except
kid
for virtual
went.
went.
Every single one.
So I mean, that to me is wonderful, but like I don't think that's always going to be the case. And
Always.
that's
No, you
my
can always have that
opinion.
margin.
So
Can I just throw in, I've 20 years of seeing class trips come and go in the islands for 8th grade up until our own merge, which lost our 7th and 8th grade. And it worked all years, much what Emily said. We had kids who had some of the parents with lagging skills uninvolved, and their kids were still able to go on the trip because of the fundraising. It took a it was a couple of staff members with parents, and everyone knew each other. It's a small community like this, and yes, maybe you couldn't reach a parent, but they went and knocked on the door and said, hey, we're organizing this trip, can your child go, we're fundraising, this is what it's about. And so it was that reach out. It wasn't just like, if a parent didn't say anything, they reached out and found a way to communicate so that their kid could be included. Now, I've never understood the 8th grade trip. I went to Missisquoi. 8th grade was just like a little picnic. No big deal. They got, this whole thing is even living in it. So I'm just like, whoa. But I've seen it work beautifully. I've seen amazing trips. I've seen chaperones who had a little bit too much fun on the trip, some parents. But, you know.
And if that is the case in the attitude, then I take back everything I said. Like, if there is that outreach, I mean, that's all I want to make sure of.
That is
like,
just my experience from another
so
school.
having
in a
these
similar
conversations,
setting.
I think, are so important, because knowing that that's what it takes sometimes. You know, that's all I wanna make sure of, is that no one's left behind.
And I think that's what all people want who organize these trips, and any staff member who's willing to take on this, honestly, big challenges sometimes, because 8th grade is their babies. It's a lot of parent personalities that don't always get along. Any employee who's willing to take on this reaches out to make sure those kids can go if the kid wants to. I think one time we kept a kid back because of behavior.
So, I feel like we need to move on to, but I think that what I heard from a bunch of folks is that we'd love to have some numbers to really understand the cost of the trips, where we're taking the kids, what kinds of experiences they're having, and maybe we can try to bring that back to the board in maybe for November meeting. Lynn, who would be gathering? I mean, are we asking that of our building leaders to gather that data?
They would be the only ones that would have it, yes.
So
I think what you're looking at, I don't think the board, I think you're just wanting data, not really to weigh in on the where part, but the data part for where they have gone, what it's included, and what your overall cost per year was. Is that right?
Well, yeah, but I'm also trying to honor what Lisa was saying as far as the educational component, so it's helpful to know the kind of experiences that the kids are having on their 8th grade
Does the policy
trips.
say, touch on the educational piece of it?
No, we decided to keep it broad
Yeah.
at that time.
And it seems like more
We
often
did have
than
that
not.
conversation though.
Yeah.
I mean, my experience with the trips, at least in Montgomery, is more often than not, they have a very strong educational component. They may not be exclusively educationally oriented, but within the context of the fun and the adventure. So, so if Morgan, maybe we want to have that in October before we start, as we head into budgeting, eh?
Yep.
So do leaders feel like you all could work on pulling together some of those numbers for us in advance of budget season?
Thank you, because I was just thinking, like, I have no idea what that would be. Thank you, Emily.
All right. Anything further on this subject? All
I
right.
have nothing else, Mary.
Thanks, Lynn. So for our principal reports, just to let folks know, Lynn and I had talked about going back to having a quick 3-minute overview from our principals, because we were having a lot of meetings where we weren't really hearing from some of our building leaders. So not the way we used to do it when it was quite long, 10-15 per, and the meetings were very long. So moving forward, Lynn and I thought it might be nice to just highlight from each of the building leaders. And especially as we're at the start of the school year, that would be nice to hear. So Rhoda, you're up.
All right. Let's see. Well, our parking lot is finished. It's beautiful. And we've had lots of comments about it. We've been working hard through our in-service, which I feel like I touched on in the school spotlight a bit. And we had our big ice cream social, which there was a lot of people there, and it seemed to go really well. I don't know what else to do.
Great. Thanks, Rhoda. Lenny, anything to highlight?
Could highlight the fencing for the preschool, play school playground was finally put in, so that
Nice.
whole project from beginning to now, we've got it all kind of taken care of.
Sweet.
So that's pretty awesome, and the kids are loving it and having fun with it. I think the other thing I'd want to highlight is that we were very, very fortunate, but I just manifested it that we had the school-based behavior consultant was able to be hired, because there was potential that this year could have been without one, and that was going to be something we were going to navigate. So I'm very excited to have that happen. It's going to allow us to continue to maintain and build upon, because that was the intention of hiring the SEL coach, to build upon our structures around social emotional learning and behavior support. So I'm really happy that we were able to look out and have somebody high and suitable.
Thanks, Lenny. Sandy?
For me, I first want to say I feel like we had some of the smoothest few opening days that I can recall. So maybe it's because we're post-pandemic, but I kept thinking to myself, is this really the first day of school? Because it felt really like we were ready. So that was fantastic. But other than that, in my report, I think I would like to focus on something new that we're adding this year, and it's part of our pandemic response plan that we created over a year ago now. One of the things that we agreed to take on before August of 22 was whole school community meetings. So our focus is really getting back to community all around, between our school and our students from the littles to the bigs being able to interact with each other. We really noticed at the end of last year, we do paired reading every Friday morning right after the Pledge of Allegiance for 15 minutes, and we pair up the olders with the youngers, and they just love that time together, all of them. And it's like gives you goosebumps when you walk around and watch the interactions with the students. So it's really great. So we're going to start with a once a month whole school community meeting, and we're going to highlight different things, and we're going to have one grade level do like a spotlight each so we can see what they're doing in their classrooms. And it's going to be student led with a couple of adults advising as like a little bit of a team. We're going to put a group together, and student led with students that are brave enough to get on the microphone and actually do this. And there's going to have a template so that they each month know, like we might address, like do some happy birthdays, and we'll, like I said, spotlight of what one grade level is doing in the classroom. But we're starting a shout out box, so we're going to do some shout outs across and it's going to be in the gym and in a big circle versus in the bleachers, so everybody can see each other. And we'll have exact like seats where each class is going to sit each month. So 8th grade might be next to 2nd grade, and then 7th grade and next to 3rd grade. So we're going to really mix them up, and just really hoping it's going to give us that joy of being together as a whole school. Forward to how the first one rolls at the end of September. End of September is going to be 8th graders introducing the code of character to the whole school, because we've had a few years where we do our skits and things like that. So we're starting off with the kickoff with the code of character.
Nice. That's awesome, Sandy. Thank you. Jessica.
Hi. So I'm sort of going to work backwards on my board report. If you've been to Sheldon, you've noticed the large cedar trees were removed. They were at the end of their lives. That really confused new staff who went in one day, the next day they weren't there and did not know what happened. It's kind of funny.
Is Hazen thrilled?
Hazen was thrilled.
He hates those trees.
He hated them, yes. I think he enjoyed taking those out. But it's also safer from a security standpoint because any potential intruders can't hide behind them. Now it's training kids not to trample them. High quality staffing. Because we are missing a 5th grade team member, we pulled together 3 interventionists, the school clinician, and a highly qualified para who are in there supporting the 5B piece we're missing their teacher, so that we can maintain the 5th grade schedule as we wanted to, and still maintain interventionists throughout the school, so we aren't losing interventionists to be a full-time teacher. It's been a little bumpy, but those bumps are getting smoothed out as we work through it, and starting to maintain more consistency for the kids. And then the biggest celebration was the welcome back night. There was easily over 150 people there. I think you were there, Courtney and Miranda. Smiles all around. The PTO got a lot of sign-up forms for soccer and things like that. There was ice cream. It was just a good time. Adults were playing kids were playing with adults, and we could see their faces, and it was just, people were genuinely happy to see each other and be there. And that's what I got.
Great, thank you so much. So we're at board business. with future agenda items, we already made mention of revisiting class trip costs and details. Anyone else have anything they'd like to have on the, that they know now, that they would like to have on the agenda? There's always time. Next meeting is October 5th. Our SU board report, I'm happy to share some of what we talked about. Let's see, we had a few action items. We needed to approve the continuous improvement plan. And that, we did approve that. There was a discussion around a bus route, and that was also an action item, so we've now approved that there'll be a bus route to and from Enosburg High School to Richford High School every day. And this is going to allow students to access from Bakersfield and Sheldon. And Beth O'Brien, principal at Richford Junior Senior High School, was able to kind of accommodate the little bit of delay at the start of the school day that might happen for kids, 10, 15 minutes delay, as far as kind of jumping into their classes and stuff. She doesn't feel it will be an issue. And then in the context of that conversation, another issue around busing and equitable access was raised. Michelle and Robin were talking about some of their students who are in special programs and some of the challenges around busing those kids where they need to go. And it raises, they raised some really good and important questions around, if we're providing these programs for these kids that we are obligated to offer, then, but they are not able to access them because of transportation limitations, if that's something that we need to look at, if we're really focusing on equitable access to all of our programs. So we punted that part of the conversation, waiting on a little more data around what that ridership would look like, what the routes might need to be, and the SU board's going to revisit that in October, at the October meeting. But the bus route from Enosburg to Richford and back at the end of the day was approved, which I think is an excellent. It's going to allow more students from Bakersfield and Sheldon to access Richford if that's their high school of choice. So that's a really good, a good thing. We also went over the SBAC results from 2021, central office, a lot of central office updates, and those are all available in the packet for the SU board that you can access if you'd like to see what each person within the central office is presently working on. And then we did an executive session for a superintendent evaluation, which we will be doing in just a little bit with this board. Morgan talked a little bit about the census block grants for special ed, and the numbers coming in higher, which is a good thing. No real location update for the move, the central office to the new space in Enosburg, although work is moving forward with the renovation of that structure, and the central office currently is on just a month-to-month rental situation in Richford. So, Kat, do you feel like I got everything?
Yeah, I missed a lot because of
we
some
were having some technical
difficulties,
issues,
so
right?
I appreciate your update.
I think that's about it. Yeah. All right. And then this item on the agenda, the VSBA anti-racism mini grant, shouldn't be on this because it's something that's going to be worked on at the SU level. And Michelle, Irish, and I are going to be working on that, and it will benefit NMV, but also it's relative to ER for Enosburg Richford as well. So that brings us to our superintendent evaluation, which is an executive session. So I don't feel like folks need to come back after the executive session. I'm gonna make a motion. Thank you all so much. I'm glad to hear the start of the school year is going so well. Really appreciate all the awesome work. I'll make the motion to enter executive session. We'll do that by roll. John,
Aye.
Aaron, Lisa,
Hi.
Kat, Miranda, Arlene,
Aye.
Emily, and Mary is an aye.
So we're in executive at 8:46.
8:46.